started going to church when I was about 14 years old. And I spent a couple of years as a fanatical Mormon and became an agnostic.
So your religious beliefs did start with Mormonism?
Yeah, and I was about the 7th grade, and well, no, I started with Methodism actually. The closest church around was Methodist, and so I would go to Methodist, and I'd round up all the kids in the block, and we would go to Methodist Sunday school. And I was really into this religion. My parents would take me to church and leave me off, and they'd come to church afterwards and pick me up. But neither one of them wanted anything to do with Mormonism themselves.
So were they atheists?
No, my grandfather had a kind of a religion of his own in which he believed in God, and that if you were good, you'd be treated right in the next lifetime and all this. But a very simple thing, and I think that was basically, I know that was basically my mother's religion, and it really didn't have a name. Well, I was an Eisenhower Republican.
Okay, that's the first thing that you were.
Politically, yeah.
All right, an Eisenhower Republican.
You know, I agreed with every editorial in the Los Angeles Mirror. Virgil Finkley wrote, more authoritarian, middle of the road and conservative. And it was in the military that my views changed. Just before I went into the military, I discovered the first Unitarian church in Los Angeles. And it was very left-wing in its orientation. And I really liked, I just really liked their attitude. You know, there was a pamphlet there called Unitarianism, a 3-time loser, you know, describing how the church had failed to evolve on 3 different occasions towards greater tolerance and away from racism and so forth. And I just liked that candor. But I don't know, Greg sent me a postcard a few years back, and it said on it the question, what do you get when you cross a Unitarian with a Jehovah's Witness? And the answer, someone who wanders door to door for no apparent reason. You know? You kind of always wind up with the Unitarians kind of feeling like, well, why is this a church? You know? It's a church for people who don't believe in God or something, basically. But at one time, it was a big thing because the Unitarians believed there was only one God and not a Trinity. And that's what it was all over, why they were called Unitarians. They were very persecuted for believing that God was not a God. I went into the Marine Corps with a bit of an interest in socialism and communism. And so I remember my first unit, when I went on active duty, I was sitting there one day reading a biography of Lenin, and this sergeant walked by, staff sergeant, Christian Scientist staff sergeant, and he says, you know, Thornley, I look at the books you read sometimes, and I wonder about you. And I say, well, know thy enemy. And he said, yeah, well, I still wonder about you. And he walked out of the hut, and I didn't know there was another staff sergeant sitting right behind me. Said to the guy next to me, I've never met a group of people more proud of their own ignorance than staff sergeants in the Marine Corps. And then here's a guy who's willing to give his life fighting communism, and he was willing to die, keep that from becoming everybody's way of life. Well, I got the very disturbing statistic somewhere that said 60% of the people in the world went to bed hungry every night. I went to Manila when I was in the Philippines on leave on a weekend, and one of the first things I saw when the cab driver let me off, he let me off right next to the real poor section of town, city of walls, bombed-out buildings that were bombed in the war, where people lived in cardboard huts and so forth. And here's this man walking down the street in my direction who looks like a skeleton. I mean, he just absolutely doesn't look like he's going to last another day or two. And as he passes me, I notice he has this real look of panic in his eyes. I had always sort of imagined that as people starve to death, their minds dulled and they just faded away. But here he was very alert and very afraid and very desperate looking. And the U.S. had owned the Philippines until July 4th, 1948, I believe it was. And this was going on, and I just decided that my communist friend and Nick Granich and San Francisco was right, that fill their stomachs and then worry about the civil liberties. Everybody that was responsible for creating the situation should be lined up and shot. I just became very angry. And so I started reading books on communism. So I found this big, thick philosophical volume written by Jesuits about dialectical materialism. And so I read that. At the same time, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, and it kind of seemed to me to be saying the same thing, which is, work hard and devote yourself to your duties and don't lust after results. Everybody will be happy and everything will be fine. And then not long before I left, I was introduced to somebody else because they were an atheist, as was I. Same thing that happened with Oswald. This guy's name was Mims. I was one of those atheists.
Did you become a communist?
Well, I decided that when I came back to the United States, the first thing I was going to do was contact Nick Granich and ask him how I could be most useful to the cause as a member of the Communist Party or as a fellow traveler. Somebody said, "Hey, Kerry, there's another atheist in the outfit. Do you want a meeting?" I said, "Yeah." And they just merged our outfit with a couple of others and a lot of new people. And somebody took me over his hut, and his name was Mim, M-I-M-S, and he said, like Oswald has said, communism is my religion. Mim said, "This book here is my Bible," and it was Atlas Shrugged. And he turned to Galt's oath, "I will spend no part of my life for another man, nor ask any other man to spend any part of his life for me." When I first heard of that, I thought, my God, it's the epitome of amorality, And I was having a really hard time figuring out what kind of link between logic and ethics. I mean, there really was no logical reason to be good, and yet I wanted to be good, and I wanted to punish people who were bad. I couldn't really justify it in terms of the whole worldview. And so I read Whitman when I was about 14, too. He had a big influence on me. And through all these changes, I decided to read Atlas Shrugged, picked up a copy in Yokohama and started reading it on board ship. A few days before I left, and I found it very convincing. Bud Simcoe came by, and he had been defending me from the officers who said I was a communist by saying, "He's more American than I am. He's more American than you are."
Before you really became a communist, you moved right through that into the Ayn Rand thought.
Yeah, well, this seemed like a big change to me. I was just moving from scientific socialism to scientific capitalism. The important thing to me was that Ayn Rand was an atheist. But the idea that there could be a morality based on rationality really appealed to me. She said it's like building a bridge. There's a right way and a wrong way to build a bridge. And the same with society. There's a right way and a wrong way to construct a society. And that gives you some basis to think of right and wrong. And also dispensed entirely with altruist morality, which was, being an unselfish thing. And I still feel content in my heart for altruists a lot of times. I went back to my base to get my belongings a couple of days before we set sail, and from the processing barracks I was in Yokosuka. And Bud walked up to me and he said, "Well, have you decided what you're going to do when you get back to the States?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to be a capitalist pig."
Right.
And what I decided I would do is that my big argument that persuaded me was in order for there to be enough production for you to feed everybody, the producers had to be rewarded. And so what if they got more than the other people, because everybody was better off because they were in the world. And so he was surprised, and I showed him the book. Then I was reading it on the way back to the States. My only remaining doubt as I was reading it was that maybe she wasn't an atheist, because there's one scene there when Francisco de Anconia destroys this Mexican village where Anaconda Copper was, had a mine that was nationalized. But he says, but they left the church because they'll need it. And so...
because they'll need it.
Yeah. But then at some point, came out very strong atheist. So by the time I got back to the States, I had a whole new plan. I was going to go back to the Philippines, which I really liked. And I was going to open up, when I read Communist, I was going to published a newspaper in the Philippines called the Red Rooster, and I was going to open up a coffee tobacco shop in Manila, a little atmospheric type place, and kind of a quaint old store. I don't know, it was like, and I was going to raise chickens. I was going to own and invest in chicken farms, because the cheapest source of protein in the world is chickens. I was going to feed everybody in the Philippines. Yeah, probably. Ogden Nash wrote the shortest poem in the English language. It was titled Fleas, and the poem itself was Adam Hadam. And so I composed the shortest prayer, which is, Jesus, please us.
What do you think?
I try not to think. It always gets me in trouble. In 1965, after the trauma of dealing with the people who loved Kennedy so much, and they wanted to kill me for hating him and saying that I'm glad he was shot, and for knowing Oswald and the Marines and all that. And I left New Orleans and was living alone in Virginia, and I just decided to write Greg, and we started corresponding, and with the Discordianism, and I suddenly discovered a use for nonsense. I realized it was really therapeutic. If there were Discordia and torchlight parades, it's just, you can have just as much fun as fascists have, but in the name of nonsense instead of something destructive. And so I saw a Steve Allen thing one night where he was reading this poem about people named Clyde, written by this guy named Clyde, defending people named Clyde. And as the reading went on, it was one of these very rhythmic poems, and the drummer started drumming in the band, and people started marching around the stage, and they started turning the lights on and off and everything. And it really looked like the kind of, except, celebrating nothing but confusion.
What is the relationship between Discordianism or chaos and anarchy, or what is the difference?
Well, anarchy is, contrary to popular belief, is a more sophisticated, higher level of social organization than we've got now. It's a society that's so organized that it doesn't have to coerce anybody. And Discordianism is kind of callous and chaosophers, Chaoisc.
Callous.
There's the ones who
Sacred cow.
go around stirring up chaos, and there's the one that
As a provocateur.
just whatever, and the ones that observe chaos and appreciate it. And then there's the knowers, this is in my book, introduction. They're the ones who know better than the one. See, Wilson and Craig and I had a big argument about this. Somebody had already killed somebody in the name of Discordianism in Los Angeles, and somebody else had written a letter to the Free Press about it. I don't know what happened or not, but they wrote the letter. And Greg read it and got all freaked out. For me, it was, well, what do you expect? I mean, this is a society of people joined by nailing their applications of membership on telephone poles and alienating all kinds of people.
I was wondering about people who take Discordianism as an endorsement for committing crimes against people. I don't think that was
not an endorsement for anything. It's just it's reality with a name imposed on it of an organization. You know, it's just what was there already in unorganized form is still there in unorganized form, but now it has a name. You know, and that's the Discordia Society. Mm-hmm. And most Discordias have ever met one another. You know? Mm-hmm. And Wilson's feeling about it all was that he shouldn't worry about what happens in the name of Discordianism. It will be appropriate for everything to happen in the name of Discordianism.
Oh, everything must happen before it can all be over.
In 1963, Greg Hill introduced me to marijuana, and we got stoned together. And it just seemed to me, at the beginning it seemed to me that there was something kind of constipated and self-important about Ayn Rand. I found somebody suggested that I read Psychotherapy East and West by Alan Watts, and so I read that. I was enormously impressed, and his basic point was that what's wrong with the world is that everybody's so concerned about surviving. If we just live like the Zen masters, as if life were a dream, we'd all be much happier. But it's just the opposite of what I read. You equated egoism with survival. You know, your survival was the top value for her. Alan Watts, it was at the bottom of the list. I read that, and I also began smoking more marijuana. Then I went out to the West Coast after the Kennedy assassination.
So, was Eris interfering with you before you were interfering with Eris?
No, not in the least.
Okay. So as soon as you became aware of Eris Discordia, did you become a Discordian right then and there?
I was the co-founder of the Discordian Society, the Discordianism was something that started in high school, though. We're talking now about years later, but I didn't regard it as serious thought at the time. Greg has added some very philosophical stuff that makes it more profound than it would be otherwise. After I got out of the service and had become this raving right-winger, Greg and I became fast friends and organized the Discordian Society, disorganized the Discordian Society at that point. There was no place to be in Whittier very much if you're under 18, and we were hanging out in bowling alleys for that reason. These 24-hour bowling alleys. And one night we were walking down Whittier Boulevard in the middle of the night. Police stopped us and they told us that we were guilty of vagrancy. And Greg said, "Vagrancy? I live here." And he said, "Yeah, that doesn't make any difference. You're out at odd and unusual hours." Cops pulled away. I turned to Greg. I said, "Greg, let's go somewhere else. Either San Francisco or New Orleans." And I said, "Let's go to New Orleans, farther away from Whittier." I'd been very admiring of the Hindu religion some years back, and had thought once in a while it was too bad I couldn't believe in that, all this other stuff too. And suddenly what the LSD says to me is that the Hindus were right, so that's what happened to me. I was now sort of a psychedelic Hindu, and at the same time I was going farther culturally. I just began going far away from Ayn Rand. I went out to California, and while I was in political agreement with the people that ran Innovator, most of them were really all reason and no rhyme. They just completely utilitarian. The office was very kind of ugly looking. I began to drift away from them because of that. I wound up in about 1966, I guess it was. Robert Hanson Wilson wrote me a letter. I sent him, maybe 67 or 68. Anyway, I sent him a copy of the Innovator, and he wrote me a letter. And we got into an argument about the views of the anarchist Lysander Spooner, who was a monetary mutualist, which is the thing very much against banking as it exists now, and against charging interest. So there was an article by Lysander Spooner.
Robert Anton Wilson. Was that your first contact with him?
No, he wrote me a letter. I sent him an Innovator. Since you're interested in Spooner's Spooner organized his own post office on a bet. He was an attorney. I asked him also there was no government who would deliver the mail. So he organized the American Letter Mail Company, making more deliveries today than the government, was charging less for stamps and making a profit besides. And eventually they had to make it against the law.
Where are you today? What is your belief system today, leaving behind the things that you once believed?
Pretty much essentially what it was after Wilson and I got in this argument about Spooner. He sent me a bunch of pamphlets about Spooner's economic ideas. And I wrote back and I said, you know, my problem with left-wing anarchists is that they seem to talk like they're more interested in killing all the bankers and insurance men and this, that, and the other thing than they are about overthrowing the government. And he wrote back and he says, well, actually, that's not true. He says, most left-wing anarchists are interested in things like child rearing. I had already read summary by A.S. Neal. That really caught my imagination. And so I became a left-wing anarchist.
Under your intellectual history here, but I would like to go to the present.
Philosophy I held at that point, after the arguments with Wilson, is the philosophy I hold at present.
And how would you characterize it in terms of what you are now?
Well, it's got a lot of names, some of which are very appropriate. One of them, they call it decentralism. And another, they call it individualist anarchism. Sort of the grandmother of the counterculture was very much involved with it all her life, Mildred Loomis.
Mildred Loomis?
Yeah. When I met her, she was an old lady, and she really was interested in all these young ideas. One of them was sexual communes and things of that sort. And there was a book called The Heretic Experiment. She wanted to get a copy of it. She was in Tampa for a little while, the bus station, the layover. So we went over to the nearest bookstore, and right there in downtown Tampa, and she says to the girl, there's a little old lady, says to the girl behind the counter, do you have a book called The Heretic Experiment? And the girl says, I'm not sure. She says, what kind of book is it? She says, it's a sex book. So the girl says, well, I'm afraid we don't carry that kind of book here. So Mildred went back and found a copy on the shelf and right up very triumphantly purchased it.
It's a novel. But at this point, I'm just trying to kind of encapsulate where you are now and what you stand for,
Well, the only ways I've changed is that from my Mormon past, I kind of had the tacit assumption that whatever your philosophy was, you had to go around making converts all the time. I would avoid calling myself an anarchist these days, simply because Hagbard Chelene, the hero of the Illuminati trilogy, I found particularly admirable. And my head, if I had it all to do over again, I would have done it his way, because he managed to weaken the government and made a living smuggling, and he didn't sacrifice himself at all, and he...
So is he like your role model or something, you think?
Yeah, I was kind of like a role model, If I had it to do over again, I never quite... But it's like, basically, you don't push too much the fact that you're an anarchist, and you just live. You don't throw yourself on the barricades like the anarchist. You don't throw yourself on the barricades like the anarchist.
Have you accomplished anything?
Yeah, I've accomplished practically everything I wanted to accomplish.
You wanted to become a writer?
Yeah.
Have you lived the life of a writer?
Pretty much so, but not with much success on the economic end of it.
So you couldn't say you've made a living as a writer?
A couple of times I made a living as a writer of pornography for about a year at a time. I made a living as a writer, but like I got $600 here and $600 there.
Hittite word?
Chicken fleas.
A chicken flesh.
Actually, the Latin term is literally means chicken fleas.
And so what's the connection now between that and Crowley and the APO?
Well, what could be more foul way to die be infected with chicken fleas? Foul, F-O-W-L as well as F-O-U-L.
Okay. So are you suggesting that you were infected with these chicken fleas and that this might have something to do with...
Well, yeah, it seems kind of hard to believe it. One thing about these so-called paranoids is paranoids and professional intelligence agents both.
Mm-hmm.
We're always very skeptical of coincidences.
Well, homicide detectives are saying there are no coincidences.
Basically, that's functionally how they operate, and it's kind of funny to me, it's like and do the humor a lot in the comments and so forth. Like I say, I'm not accusing them, but might they do one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, I doubt that there are many coincidences in the world.
Okay, let's clear something up for the record. I get in a story about you told Kerry went south.
Yeah.
And in that we had a discussion that I related, where you called me up on Christmas Day, and you said, if you want to see me again, you got to get here by the night. And I said, are you dying? And you said, what do you think? And I apparently took that the wrong way. Would you like to clarify that?
Well, I was living here in Kerry's house right after I got out of the hospital. I was in here for about a week.
Mm-hmm.
And you were looking for a place to stay, and I got to thinking that the room would be ideal. I didn't realize it was the second day. And because Melissa had been working 50 hours a week and I was gone, and she didn't like cats all that much, so you could stay and live in my room with the 10 cats. For a week if you wanted, we had a room of our own, and I thought we were discussing lodging. I was discussing the logistics of lodging. Mm-hmm. And I said, next week will be too late, because next week I'll be back in the room that you could use otherwise. Mm-hmm. So it turned out that there's nothing like that anyway, and came up here to spend the night in my room, smoking dope.
No, we spent like 3, 4, 5 nights in the room.
Yeah. So that was the last thing in the world that was on my mind at the time of death. Also, I don't really see that. I think they told me I was going to probably die in 1991, and I had a very bad case of kidney failure. I reconciled myself very, very easily. Out of Warriors, anarchist, and computer study, it's been published in the introductory out of Warriors with my other book, Confession of Spiritual War, and Jetlight Recollections in that case. And so I named, by naming the book in public like that, in another book, it sort of people knew it was there, and many people had copies of that manuscript for years. I circulated as widely as possible. And figuring if everybody's already read it, there's actually no reason to keep it from being published.
So just to bring this back into the record here, you spent Christmas and up to New Year's together there, and you were struggling with your health at the time.
Well, I've been struggling with my health for many years.
And the cat, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well,
at that point, I wrote a story. You got mad at me.
Yeah, you said that for example, that I wanted to leave the door open to the cat to get it out. There's a Navajo blanket hanging over the doorway, and I wanted to leave the door about 4 inches open so the cat could come in and go out. Okay. And because we didn't have the door open, and nights that followed, the cat occasionally peed inside my room, and you complained about the smell of catfish. Well, you know, if we had, and me about me jumping up and down that one night, where I was jumping up and down to like the cat came out. And so when I started taking tranquilizer and sleeping, the cat taking 6 times up and getting having like
okay, so you got mad at me and we argued and talked about this and you're like, well, you make it look like I'm a clod or I'm dying or what. And
well, the room was, you guys were talking about how messy the room was at some point.
I did mention that the cat had parasites or whatever, fleas or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it did at the time. My vet told me I had a flea allergy.
So now, that was in the beginning of 1998, so now it's August.
Yeah.
So bring us up to date on your health and your stuff.
Well, it's just like, at some point it just became ridiculous to write a rebuttal because most of what you had said turned out to be true or things to be, and
about the fleas, what about the fleas? Tell me about them.
Well, the vermin, the unknown vermin, and I was basically picking the bumps off Harmony, who one of the two cats who seems to be very infected with sick type fleas.
And now?
And now what?
What is your condition?
I probably am going to die within a few months because I've got all kinds of parasites. I've got tick-type fleas, which are the only fleas in the world known to burrow in the human skin. And where they go after that is anybody's guess, I guess. I don't think they stick to the skin. I think they roam around your body. And I've seen them burrow through Tupperware, so I imagine they could burrow through bone cartilage and stuff like that. It's really similar.
And what did your doctor say?
About what?
About the parasites.
Oh, he said he thought I was seeing things. And without giving me any kind of physical examination and any type stuff, wanted me to see a psychiatrist. And I said I wanted to see an epidemiologist. He said, then maybe I'll let you see an epidemiologist. And I said, no. I said, I agree with you. I'd be glad to see a psychiatrist, but I want to see an epidemiologist.
Oh, when you did see an epidemiologist?
Yeah, but that was after I went doing the dialysis that morning, and this woman came up and said she was just making around, and she was just saying, so I always thought that was false, because I got into Lady Palmer very soon, until I started business taking care. And so I refused to sign the consent form for her to work for me at first. I worked with me. Then it was a really strange day. I got up that morning, and I had not been to dialysis the previous Thursday, and now it was Tuesday, and I really didn't feel good. I was having BD cells and a whole range of complaints, and so I called 911, and I knew I wouldn't be able to make it on the bus, and I called an ambulance, and the ambulance driver was male and female, and driver was a male, and he said, he just got real picky, and he was kind of arguing about whether this was really constituting an emergency, and this, that, and the other thing, and it was completely as far as I was concerned. And so I got over this speculative yelling match with him, and I swore a couple of times, said fucking or something like that. And she got all flustered about that because it seems they got to use words like that around the lady, And I said, well, I was in the Marine Corps, and I was going to have bad habits. And he said, well, my father was in the Marine Corps, and he never used that. No, I really can't.
Did you get ambulance 911 call?
Yeah.
They didn't want to take you in? Is that what it was?
Yeah, they didn't put the constituted during an emergency.
Okay.
And finally I convinced him that he did. He drove off and got down to the emergency room at Crawford Lawn. His brother had taken away in the dialysis clinic. And down there at Crawford Lawn in the emergency room, Dr. Body comes in.
Dr. Body's your regular physician?
Yeah, and he's very orthodox physician. You know, he was not like a herbalism. He's in that nature. And he says, I say something, I think this thing is going to drive me crazy unless we do something about him. And he says, well, I'm afraid that might already be the case. You might already be crazy. And I was went on to argue my case. Basically, I had no access to other doctors unless I went for him. You know what I'm saying? My whole hope of getting any medical attention was right. Rests in convincing him that they really existed. And he was not really interested in looking at any evidence.
Right.
And so it was very difficult. So
he's a nephrologist, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he...
but he's your primary care physician because that's your primary diagnosis, right? So that's why he's your primary care physician.
Well, yeah, so I couldn't tell you. And anyway, at some point, the next thing is, would you like some storage? And, well, you know, I've had friends who've come out of mental hospitals for storage, and to me, you only offer storage and you're the worst thing. Yeah. And I said, I don't want storage. And I said, I want, and he said, well, you're all worked up and so much I just started not wanting something to calm myself down there. And I yelled at him, I think hey, doctor, go look at my infestation on the manifesto on my hand. A doctor who knew something about parasites was when I needed to calm down. I needed to change the situation. So this doctor is real bad about that. He walks from Kerry's chair and he asks you, how are you on? If you have any complaints to which side of the prescription, both it has your prescription. And when I got this, I went up earlier when I realized I had something really weird about my skin. I went up to his office about it one day and he said, you know, sometimes if you could you should go ahead and treat these things rather than find out what they are. That's
a common...
Yeah, well, that's horrified me. I said, we don't know whether that's true or not. We don't know this, that, or anything. And he wants to go ahead and treat it. And we don't know what it is, they want to treat it. Yeah. So, he's bad about that anyway. He said, skip right here. Yeah.
So between one thing and another, you really haven't gotten any medical attention.
No physical objective, no examinations of my really bumps and things on my body that are how would I associate with the might.
Yeah,
I'm dealing with what
he was concerned that you might have cancer.
Who was?
The doctor.
Well, not so much him, but my wife and his nurse.
You mean your ex-wife?
Yeah.
And so they did rule out cancer.
Well, eventually, yeah, but that's seriously. I come home, I come over here saying, you know, I'm dying of parasites, that thing, and she says, well, you need a GI workup.
everybody's doing it. I was getting all kinds of inappropriate therapies. And the last thing up the Via offered me was EKG, you see. And so I wanted to be on
So I asked you earlier, and there's an answer, so let's try to get you to answer this time. Tell me about the epidemiologist and what the epidemiologist said.
Well, he was basically like all the other issues. Two authorities studied gone to before that has each come up with a different conclusion. One he said it was triggers, and another he said that it was just an allergy, and it wasn't contagious. And then one said it was surgeries. And when you say the word surgeries and things like that, or
Run.
they
all run.
And so I had all this lotion they wanted me to rub myself with and to wash all my clothes. Unfortunately, I don't have any clothes. But one of the much I could do about cleaning the house, you know. And the dog was right outside my room and all that. So there's no way I could really get away from food just to move. But that was... And all the time I was asking for physical examination and objective evidence like scrapings and biopsies and so on and so forth. And I had not, I was letting the runaround.
Okay.
And the last part of the runaround was the epidemiologist who I thought was an expert on parasites. I was led to believe that. He didn't know anything about fleas at all. He had asked me questions, and I didn't seem very interested in the answers either.
So you basically, you're making my ear itch. Really, this is ridiculous. So basically, you've got a serious illness, revenues, but you don't really suffer from that as much as you're suffering from these parasites.
Well, and the parasites, the way it will kill me because it's great enough to control it. But, I mean, I've had this, I suddenly find out this weird skin condition that I've had since 2 summers ago, that I've had for 2 years, is a bunch of fleas running around inside my body, and earwigs in my ears and nasal passages, and presumably in my sinus, and mice building little houses in terms of bumps on my skin, microscopic mice that I'm allergic to them, so I can feel them very much. And so this stuff's all been going on for 2 years already, and I just don't see how I'm going to be able to survive it. I feel like what I could have done in April when I first began talking about the fleas being in my flesh was they should have put me in a hospital somewhere and expert who knew about parasites and give me 24-hour attention. I feel, it's too late now to advance.
Well, the effects of the physical problems that you've had, they have an effect on your attitude and mood.
Yeah.
The way you...
And then also, I really do have an obsession about parasites, which they have noticed, and past I thought that really, I thought I had roundworms, earthworms, and dropped along the emergency room a few weeks before I went in. I wanted to examine for hookworms because sometimes small critters run around on me, not hookworms, roundworms. Cats get roundworms and fleas, and there's a whole cycle there. I thought maybe they were around one.
Okay, so I think we pretty much covered all that. So this is my favorite question when I get interviewed. Is there anything else you want to comment on?
Let's see. I have been sufficiently humbled by reality to not have much advice anymore. I'm more like living life. I basically cut over from very few governments.
Cut over from very few governments?
Yeah.